Hi, I'm Tim Medin with Red Siege. Welcome to another one of our fantastic SiegeCasts. The top this cast is related to a question I get asked all the time. I get asked all the time, like, well, Tim, how did you come up with Kerberoasting? Which is an interesting question to a point, but realistically, the deeper question is, how do you go about doing research? How do you go about doing research? And it's weird to sort of take that step back and think, how did I do a thing? So what I did is I asked a whole bunch of other smart people that I know. I asked some of the folks at Red Siege and asked them. I talked to Josh Wright, some other folks, and tried to deconstruct and frankly, in a way, learn how I work through it. And there's different tools and techniques that you can use for your research, whether it's related to a security, of course, we'll have a much more of a security focus here, or something beyond that. So just a quick background here. Kerberoasting presented the talk in 2014 at DerbyCon. I talked to some friends. We were sitting around, and I thought to myself, "Hey, this is weird. There's a weird thing in here. What's the secret that holds this whole thing together? Literal secret." And I thought to myself, I'm like, oh, it's going to be tied to the password. Now we've got other presentations related to Kerberos and what it actually is. So I'm not going to spend time on that. But let's talk through some of the process here and figuring out what you want to do, what you want to look at. First up, you need to figure out what do you want to look at. And the question I get time and time again is, well, Tim, what should I research? And I flip it back, not to be snarky, but I think that's interesting to you. What was the looking at? We were like, well, that's weird. What's the thing we were like, I wonder if there's any particular issues in this thing because maybe nobody has looked into this thing. So find the thing that is interesting to you. If I tell you what to look at, you might be like, well, I hate that idea. And then where's your motivation? Because during your research, it is going to be an absolute beating at some times. It's going to be difficult. You're going to get frustrated. You're going to get stuck. We'll come back to some of that in a little bit. But figure out what that is. Now, if you don't have an idea, meet up with some other folks, right? Expose yourself to more technologies, whether it be at conferences, watching videos, talking to people into Slack. And if you come across something, you're like, I don't know what that is. Do some research into that. Figure out, is this something I want to dig in more? Now, before you begin your research into a specific thing, the first step is, figure out, has somebody else done this? Look at the prior research. Many times, someone will have looked at what you're looking into. Not maybe 100%. Maybe they've looked in this direction and you want to explore someplace else. But you might get some context. You might find tools that can help you fast forward some of your research. So look at that research. Spend a lot of time on Google, right? Look around, figure out as you're going through new keywords. So for example, I was looking at Kerberos. The first thing, well, what the heck is into that and finding new terms like, okay, what's a service ticket? How is this encrypted? What are the different requests? And it just ended up being this path where I started taking more and more notes, trying to figure out what this thing was and what was already out there. And I found some other tools that were sort of tangential. They kind of touched on dissecting Kerberos because that's really what I need to do. And I looked at that code to help me understand other pieces. So piece A helped me understand a little bit better on piece B, which then helped me understand C, which all of those helped me understand the RFCs. You're gonna have to dig into those RFCs. they're not the easiest thing to read, especially when you start looking at packet deconstruction and understanding some of the terms inside of those things. You many times are going to need to understand how to learn the thing before you even get to the thing. You might be 3 steps away, like, here, I want to look at this. Well, it's referenced in this tool. This tool uses this language. This thing I need to first learn so that I can use the tool and then attack the protocol, whatever it might be. So that extra research, that third-party research, is going to be very, very valuable. I actually did this early on in my career. There's a blog post on Console Cowboys from, I think, 2012, so almost a decade old, or maybe even a decade old at this point. And it was someone I knew had done some research into a camera, right? This IoT device. And it was literally a hack by numbers. Grab the firmware from the website, use binwalk to take the files apart, use DD to chop it up. Back in those days, we had to use DD because binwalk wasn't fancy enough to actually do the cutting itself. And then start analyzing those files. And I ended up doing the same thing. I'm like, this is interesting to me. I bought a different camera. I got a different firmware and followed through the process that somebody else did. Now, my stuff wasn't fresh. I didn't write binwalk. I didn't write the tools to figure out the formats. I didn't write the tools to decompress the pieces of the firmware. I was literally following a blueprint written by somebody else. And what happened at the very end is I ended up finding a vulnerability where there was an extra account used to test the device before release. And that was a hard-coded password in every single one of the devices. I actually ended up using it as a bug bounty before bug bounties were a big thing, and it got me a few $1,000s. And literally using somebody else's research. Now, what happens if there's no other research, right? If there's no other research, this is a double-edged sword. The next point here. So no research, it's a good thing, it's a bad thing. And you're like, might be thinking like, well, that's a good thing. Why? Well, the good part is maybe nobody else has looked at this. You might be the first person digging into a particular technology, protocol, hardware, software, whatever it might be, which means you get to plant the flag first and say, I claim this land for Spain. And you can open up an entire area of research into this thing that nobody else has done before. Has done it before. There's no phone a friend. There's no, hey, let's look at this blog post to see how to do some of this. Now, you might have, as we mentioned, research that's a little bit tangential, but you're not going to have the follow the numbers to complete the attacks here. This means you might have to write your own tools. You might have to repurpose other tools, write your own tools from other people's libraries. It's challenging work. This is very challenging, right? But it can be very, very rewarding. Now, when you're going to look at, in my case, a specific protocol, again, it could be an application and the specific way that you interact with it, whatever it might be, break it down into the simplest pieces. Break it down into pieces. Pull away the extra stuff until you're left with the bones, the guts. And make sure that you understand it well enough that you can explain it to somebody else. That's sort of, and I forget who's famous for this quote, but you don't understand something until you can explain it to somebody else. A little bit simplistic, but you want to be able to break this thing down very simply. Break it down into analogies. An example here, I was talking to Josh Wright, as I mentioned. And Josh Wright, this is a phenomenal example. He was teaching some, I think it was high school or junior high students. I forget what it was. He was going to teach them how to pick a lock. So what he did is he gave all the students locks and picks and said, go. No instruction. Go. And guess how many locks they picked? 0. He then went back and explained to them how a lock works. How does a lock work? What are the fundamentals? How do the pins work, right? Explain to them how it worked. He said, now try it again. And he actually had a couple of them because they knew how the lock worked. They were able to do some rudimentary picking and pick those locks. And then he went back and explained, hey, here are some other concepts for picking the lock here. But once you understand how that lock works, it means we can then take a step back and design and our attacks to be specific to the mechanisms and the functionality, in this case, of the lock. And I love this very simple breakdown. I think it's a very brilliant way to do this. Similarly, when you're looking at one of these pieces, ask why. Why is this thing doing what it is? And then why is it doing this other thing? Ask it. There's a sort of a famous saying, ask why 5 times. Okay, so if this is true, why? And then why is that? And then why is that? And then why is that? And get it back to the basic, most simple thing. And there's a great article here from Entrepreneur Magazine, sort of tied to this, a little bit tangential. And it talks about the whys. Why ask multiple times? And related to that, ask if. Ask the if here. What if? If this is true, and if this is next, what's the next piece? Right? Like, so if Kerberos is used to authenticate the user, well, how is a user authenticated? What is the piece to prove who I am? Well, that's a password. Well, if that password is used to identify me, is that same password, that same if, used to identify the server or authenticate? And just peeling these pieces back and asking, if this is true, what else is true? If the process is A, B, C, D, can I do a C, B, D? Can I skip B? Can I replace B with something else? Can I go straight to D? So we need to understand the process so we can pull it apart and then try to reconstruct it ourselves. Right? And in the case of Kerberos, one of the pieces I was doing some research on was what essentially became known as the silver ticket attack. Benjamin Delpy did it better than me, and frankly beat me to it, frustratingly enough. But taking that ticket apart now, and then we can sort of build our own ticket. Now, when you're doing all of this stuff, it's super important to know you are going to suck at something until you're good at it. If you're not okay at being bad, then you will never get good at something. I have a 3-year-old. It's not too long ago where he was learning how to walk. Guess what? He was terrible at it. He fell on his face over and over and over again. And there are so many things, especially as I watch him, where he's really bad at something, but he's cool with it. That's his life. And he's just really, really bad at it. And he's like, well, that's impressive now, right? And I don't mean that to mock my child or any child, but as adults, we lose that. We lose being okay with being bad at things. I was listening to somebody else, a podcast, and talking about how to get good ideas. Well, to have good ideas, you have to have a lot of bad ones. It's like the faucet, right? You want to jump in the shower. You don't turn the knob on and immediately jump in the shower because it's probably going to be a little bit cold. We want to get the cold water, the bad ideas, out so that we can get to the warm water, the good ideas. And you have to be okay with both. And you're going to go through a lot of trials. You're going to try this thing. You're going to beat it up over and over and over again. You're like, that's not going to work. And if there's no other research, there's nobody to ask, right? You're stuck on this on your own. You have to be okay with this. There is no shortcut. It's sort of the piece here that I get asked all the time, like, well, how'd you know to do that? I didn't. And this ties very much to pen testing. Like, how did you know this attack was going to work? I had no clue. None. But I know 100 possible things that might work. So I tried them all, and eventually one of them worked. And you don't know ahead of time. And you have to be okay with that. You have to be okay with the fail train, right? You got car after car after car after fail. At the very end, you got your caboose where you got your successes. One of the great quotes from Thomas Edison, and I'm going to mangle this quote, but he was trying to figure out how to do the light bulb. And he was having failure after failure after failure. And somebody asked him about it. He's like, are you disappointed that you have now 500 failures? He says, no. I now know 500 ways to not make the light bulb. And I think it's such a beautiful way to look at that. I have learned how it's not going to work. So eventually, I might get closer to it actually working, right? You have to keep fighting. You're going to have to, you don't have the other research. There is no, hey, how did you solve this problem? Now, ask other people. Like, hey, I'm stuck in this specific piece. What would get me to that next little step? And maybe that next little step. Or, I'm trying to use this library in Python, for example. Ask someone who's good at Python that might be able to help you with one piece or another piece, something like that, right? Now, just because there's no one that's done the whole bit of research that you're looking into doesn't mean that there aren't people who have done incremental pieces, right? And we're basing that so much with innovation isn't a monster that comes out of nowhere, the hopeful monster. It's incremental little changes. So build on top of the other research, use other people. Frankly, when people ask me about something that I'm good at, I feel honored. Don't hesitate. Don't be afraid to ask other people for help. There's a lot of folks out there who are like, well, I don't want to ask because I don't want to seem stupid. And I'm not trying to, this might sound insulting, but one of the best people I know who's totally okay with asking questions is Ian on my team. He's like, I don't know. I'd rather just ask this question than this. And he's like willing to ask this beautiful thing. And I like to learn from Ian when he asks questions like this. Meanwhile, I know plenty of folks who are like, well, I don't want to ask this question because I don't want to seem dumb. I don't want to seem like I don't know. Cool. Maybe nobody knows the answer. And that's cool because then maybe you find a group of people and you can work on the solution together. I was talking to another example here from Josh Wright. He was looking at a protocol, and there was no dissector for Wireshark. So in Wireshark, there's a little piece at the bottom that takes the packets and rips them apart, and it shows you the various pieces. And he's like, well, great. But remember that double-edged sword that we talked about before. There's no research, which means you're going to do it yourself. It's the hard mode. But at the same time, it means probably nobody else has looked here. So we might find some fun and interesting things. And to conclude that story with Josh was working on one of those and was fuzzing, and both with his fuzzing crashed Wireshark and also crashed the target service at the same time, which is a beautiful thing. Well done. Two bugs for the price of one, right? So, in summary, and I'm kind of going back to this, don't give up. This is the piece where most people fail. Don't give up, right? It's you don't know when you're at the end. So you end up keep plugging and plugging and plugging. A number of years ago, we did an event where I went on Amazon and I bought like $300 worth of random hardware and event. Let me teach you some concepts on how we can analyze this IoT devices and the firmware. And I showed him things like bin walk and strings, a file to rip some of these pieces apart. Spent about 30 minutes with some high-level concepts on how to take these things apart. And I had a few people who super got into it. I had a couple of people 5 minutes later like, yeah, but what are the answers? I'm like, I don't know. Like literally, I bought this crap on Amazon and brought it here so we could take it apart. Like, yeah. But what's the vulnerability? I have no earthly idea. They're like, yeah, but I don't want to do all that work. Well, I mean, I can't help you. That is part of the process. And it's difficult. I mean, frankly, it's impossible to know, am I just not able to find the issue and it's here, or is there no issue? Right? Like which one of these is true? You just keep banging away until you find out. I've got a ton of research that has gone absolutely nowhere results-wise. However, in the process, I've learned a lot more about writing Python, different protocols, different dissectors, different tools, the pwn tools. With Python, I've used those a lot more to rip things apart and understand all of those. I'm better at that. My research didn't pan out, but I learned along the way. There is no shortcut here. Going back to the story with those IoT devices, there's no fast forward button. I've got a friend of mine, and he ate a lot too, but he had time asking him like, hey, I want pen testing. What can I do? And what he did is he actually gave them a list. He's like, what I need, these were for more junior positions, is go through this training, this training, this training, this training. It wasn't a huge long list. And then let's talk about it when you're done. Nobody responded back. Nobody responded back. It's not the fun, sexy, short path. This takes, unfortunately, it takes a long time. There's some great blogs and videos. IPSec is one of them. So IPSec, Nick, I don't know if it's his last name or not, but IPSec does a lot of videos where he grabs an app, I think it's some of the Hack the Box, and starts looking through it. And what's really neat to see, the solution is cool, but if you watch it, that's not the interesting part. The interesting part is watching him fail. Because he's like, let's try this. Oh, that doesn't work. Let's try this. Oh, that doesn't work. Because when you go to a conference and you see the presentation, this is how I hacked the Gibson, right? Hack the planet. This is how I hacked a bunch. What you don't see in those 30 slides on screen is the 300 slides of stuff that didn't work, right? And one of the neat things with some of the Nick's videos, you see some of the things that don't work. It's okay when things don't work. You have to be okay with the failures to get to the success, or you're never, ever going to get to the success. Now, this is a frustrating path sometimes. Incredible. You're working your tail off, nowhere. Don't be afraid to talk to people along the way. And this seems silly. Talk to others along the way. It could be that someone has, you're stuck at this very specific step, and now you've got somebody's like, hey, there's a tool that I know that does that specific thing, and it might help you out. Or because now you understand the whole application, software, hardware, whatever it might be, you can explain it to somebody else, and quite literally in the explanation process, you're like, oh my gosh, I have an idea now. I can't express it enough how much I learn when I teach. That's a whole sort of a separate topic. But maybe the other person now, after you've explained some of it to them, has a fresh perspective on it, right? That maybe pushes you forward. And I know plenty of people are like, well, I don't want to share because then I can't take credit for it. I mean, you still can. If you look at the last slide, there were a ton of people I talked to throughout my process of developing Kerberoasting. And I listed a giant list of people on the last slide of people that I was just talking through during the process here. So discuss things with those other people. It's motivating. They might be like, that's very interesting. Keep working on that because it can be a slog along the way. If you're worried about someone stealing your work, I mean, is there a possibility? Sure. But I don't know, in my personal experience, that's less likely. And just find a different group to help you out. So what I want to encourage you to do is find that interesting thing. Right? I can't find it for you. I can't tell you to go dig into fill in the blank because it needs to be interesting for you. There was another great set of tweets relatively recently. And I forget who did it, but it talked about like the bunch of flaws found in Kerberos rather, and mine was one small piece in that. And then a whole bunch of Kerberos stuff happened. And there's a whole bunch of the next thing that came out. And don't get stuck in the trap where like, well, everybody's already figured out all the answers. There's nothing left. I mean, if that was true, we wouldn't have any more CVEs. They still exist, right? Also, there is a ton of new cloud stuff out there, and we have just begun to scratch the surface. Do not think that Microsoft, Amazon, Google, whomever has gotten it all right at this point. No. There's going to be mistakes. Maybe there's common configurations by the people who use that technology. There's always something new to dig into. Don't get stuck with I wish it was in the olden days. I mean, you've got new technology all over the place. You've got access to the better search engines. We have better ways to communicate with people all over, quite literally, the world in solving those problems. So I'm going to encourage you, go out there, hack the planet. Cool. Well, that's going to wrap up the presentation here today. Once again, I am Tim Medin with Red Siege. Feel free to join our Discord, redsiege.com/Discord. We have a lot of chat in there. If you've got questions, throw questions in there. Maybe me or my team can answer those questions. Of course, even better, we get a lot of other smart folks in there. And maybe those folks are going to be the key to answering your question. All right. Thanks, everybody.